Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Coholich. I'm coming to you from actually in the parking lot of the Potomac River in Smallwood. Um, just got off the water from a makeup tournament that they canceled 2 weeks ago, which is kind of why I'm speaking to you about it from out of my truck. Today I'm going to talk to you about fishing a flood control lake. The reason I like talking about this because the lake close to my house where I spend a lot of time fishing for fun in the summer, and also where I normally go just for fun any time of year really, um, is a flood control lake, and it's one where in the winter they drain it really low, and by the time spring and early summer occurs, it's extremely high. It's actually got one of the boat ramps underwater completely. I'm going to go through the steps on how I approach fishing. For instance, it's York Lake, which is my home lake. It's flood control. During the off season, I do some preparation on the lake while they actually have it almost to drained almost to where it's just a river. One of the things I like doing is with my phone, I have the Go Boating app on my phone, which you can go and keep it with you to any area that you're walking, and it uses the GPS in your phone to put you exactly where you're at. These two pictures, the one on the left, this is actually in one of the creeks or one of the fingers of the lake. It's an area where I do a lot of fishing. I've had a lot of luck fishing in this area. This is a sunken bridge from the old town that used to be there where the lake is. Now, what I do is I'll go in, park at the ramp, which is to the left of that picture. I'll put muck boots on, take my phone with the Go Boating app. I'll walk down into it and stand on each corner of the bridge, marking the areas on it. So on my phone, on the boating app, I can link that app to the Navionics website on their web app as long as you have a login. And from there, I can plot it on there and get coordinates and plug the coordinates into my GPS and save it as a waypoint. So when the lake is flooded, I can just pull my boat right up to it and I know right where to go. And the picture on the right is actually from where that bridge is behind it. It's a little inlet. And these are actually tire fields and posts that people have put in the lake when it's been drained. Um, some of the other stuff I like doing with it too is I like taking the pictures, saving them on my phone, and uploading them into my Simrad. So when I'm fishing and I can't remember exactly how something looked on when it was drained, I'll pull it up in there under the files so I can take a look at the picture I've taken. Now, after you've done some off seasons prep, like going and marking structure and stuff like that, and this just showing a picture of it plotted on the Go Boating app. I used the little star crosses on it. You could switch on it to any picture that's in it, and you can also add notes to yourself to remind you of certain things that you found unique when you were doing it. First time, first part of the year is late winter, early spring, where I can actually get onto the lake, and normally they actually have it high enough to where you can launch a boat. Uh, One of my favorite things to do this time of year on the lake is to target the fish on the deep and steep drop-offs. Also, depending what they're doing, since it's flood control, a lot of times they will drain it if they know weather is moving in and all that. And you can actually kind of target instead of on the steep ledges like this, you can go to creeks or creek mouths closer to the dam where they got deep ledges because when they're draining it, all the stuff's going to flow by them and the fish are going to accumulate around the points a little bit more. But what I like doing in the late winter, early spring, I like doing drop shot on the deep ledges, and also using a jigging spoon. The jigging spoons I use, I get them from Lurecraft over in Indiana. Um, and with the drop shotting, I'll use anything from a Freaky Frank's worm to a Jackal crosstail shad. Something small in presentation, but because it's late late winter, early spring, you're gonna have to more or less target the fish. They're not going to be as active as later on in the spring, so you're going to have to do some searching with your GPS and sonars to find a pot of fish or a couple good schools or even a couple nice loner marks, and you're going to more or less have to drop on them and, in a way, force feed them. Now, one of my favorite rod setups to use for that is a T. Allen with a medium action and also medium action and a moderate light tip to it. The one I use is 6.8. I do have one also that is 6.9 and a little bigger at 7.2. But I like the 6.8 one because it's a lot lighter of a setup on it. So for me, I can feel more of the subtle hits and this bottom contour a little bit better. And then towards the late spring, I target inlets like this that have deeper water, either going halfway up in the middle or right outside them. And the reason I do that is because whenever they raise them lower the lake, if they're lowering it real quick, the fish will tend to congregate a little bit back a little farther into the deeper water off the drop-offs. But for a perfect case scenario, towards mid to late spring, water's up a little bit. The fish, when the water warms up, will start moving up to spawn, and at that point I target creeks such as the one in the picture here, where it's got the drops and the ledges and stuff. There's actually deep water right out here. It's not too. I wasn't able to get it in the picture. I'll target that because you also have the spots in the back here where you'll get the largemouth and even some smallmouth, but more largemouth, the bigger ones to go back to. But you can also move out a little bit and target smallmouth in a creek like this. Now, when I'm doing that, I'll throw in something like a zoom lizard, even shaky heads when they're on the beds and stuff. At that point, though, if you're bed fishing and you can physically see them, it becomes like a mind game because a lot of times they'll just pick it up by the tail just to move it off the bed, and they won't grab the entire worm past the hook, to where if you go to set the hook, you're just going to rip it out of its mouth. It takes a lot of patience if you're bed fishing like that. It took me a while to be able to sit there and not set the hook the instant it picked it up. Now we move to summer, how I fish it in the summer. Normally in the summer, takes about mid-summer for it to gain normal summer pull, which at that point, you got a little bit of shoreline in the areas around the marinas on this lake. And what I do on particularly this lake, I target laydowns and I also target docks, because this flood control lake contains a good bit of smallmouth, and I find that when it gets real hot out, a lot of times the smallmouth will move up under the docks. Normally, almost as far up as they can get sometimes. It all depends on what kind of day it is. You got to kind of play around with the docks to find them. But I will target the marinas and also private docks. A lot of times the private docks will be the ones that are continual. It's like a new style that they're all almost afloat. They don't have to have to float underneath. What I find with those is if you can find them, they are the more productive ones. a lot of times there's always more than one fish under them, and I found that to work a lot better than the normal traditional docks, even though traditional ones work perfectly fine on this style lake. When I'm doing that, I'm using a little bit lighter of a rod because I like to be able to skip if it's a normal dock, to skip my lure way up under. And I use a 6'9" medium light with a real fast action on it, just so I can get a good hook set and be able to pull it out a little bit. One of my big things that I always stress whenever you're dock fishing is the line you're using, because not every time you get a perfect case scenario where you hook the fish and it comes right out. A lot of times they wrap up around stuff that's underneath it, or even structure underneath you didn't know about. I really suggest using a really good fluoro. I use fluorocarbon. You can use mono, but I like fluoro just for the reason it doesn't stretch. But I suggest use a really good quality fluorocarbon. The one I use, and actually all the line I use, is from Balzac's fishing line. It's a company from Germany that they brought over. Renato Enterprises did. And I use it for two reasons. One, I've never had an issue with it. I've put their fluorocarbon through a lot of stress whenever I was given a spool, and I couldn't get it to break dock fishing, even after the fish would wrap up in boat lifts, and I rip them out of it. And also because the line is stronger with a smaller diameter. So you can use a normal 8-pound line, but it'd be the diameter of a 6. So you're getting a little bit of advantage there, because then you can also bump up to using 10-pound line with a diameter of 8. That's why I use it, and I always highly suggest it. Now when I'm flipping the docks and fishing them, I like to use a weightless worm like a Senko, or even a weightless soft plastic such as like an Erie darter. Reason being is because a lot of time they're looking up, or they're right underneath the dock. So when it just crests down, goes below the floats, you can see them come out. Now that too, just like bed fishing, you got to get used to letting them have it a second or two to fully engulf before you set the hook, or you will pull it out of the knot. And another last time of year that I normally fish on the lakes in the fall, because shortly after the fall, mid to late fall, they start really lowering the lake, and once they get it down too far, you're not able to really launch a boat on it. But in the early to mid fall, you can still catch them on docks. But what I like doing is they start moving back a little bit and getting less active and a little bit more sporadic. So I normally change up and start using a crankbait. And a lot of the areas that I target when I'm using a crankbait again are like the ledges like here, where you got a little bit more of a sudden drop off, or even if you can find some banks with rock, or even a bridge that has the rocky sides, I find that to work pretty well. I normally throw a square bill, or even a little bit of a shallow deep diver. The Storm Whippleworts I've always done real good with. With them, I like to use a bait caster. Makes it a lot easier, cover a lot more water. I use a 7'10" with a medium power with a fast action to it. With that, I can feel the crankbait as it nips anything in the bottom, but also you can tell the difference between it just smacking something on the bottom and a nice fish in. A couple other baits you could also try is spinner bait, chatter bait, anything like that. Now in the flood control lake, just a little bit on Keller. This lake in particular, as long as it didn't just pour, it's normally pretty clear. I like to go with either a natural shad or white Keller, or completely opposite, and I go with a fire tiger Keller. I find either one to work, and not too much in the middle really. And when crankbaiting, I do also use the fluorocarbon. to me, I could feel it a lot better on fluorocarbon, and also it doesn't have the stretch of monofilament. So when I go set the hook, I get a good hook set in the fish. A couple key points I thought just to keep in mind when you're fishing a flood control lake. To me, fishing it is like a cycle. It repeats every single year. I always go down, look at the lake, see for something new that I missed last year, or I go and mark more stuff that I wasn't able to last year. And on this lake in particular, the cycle and how I fish it seemed to be holding true so far for the last 3 years I've lived near it. I haven't seen much variation from it, unless obviously some big cold front or something comes in, such as this year with the late start to spring. My early tournament I had on it, I saw a little bit different. They didn't come up as quick as they normally do. They're sitting back off the ledge. And also another thing that I've noticed too is when the water rises a lot of the time, the fish will rise with it. So if there's a bush up on the shoreline that now is in the water, a lot of times the smallmouth on the flood control lake will go up with it. So all that now becomes nice structure that you can target. And I've even, like the next part of it says, the lake's gotten so high in the spring that it actually completely floods one of the parking areas and the whole boat ramp. I've actually caught one of the biggest smallmouth on the lake right on top of the parking area in about 1.5 feet of water. I did it using a crankbait, but that just goes to show you that the fish, when the lake level rises, they will rise with it and go venture off also. And once I find something that works, and it's like a certain kind of drop off or the docks or certain type of structure that I'm hitting them on, I normally use the GPS on my boat and find other areas that have similar characteristics, because more than likely if you found them in one place, you're going to find them in the next place on this lake. Now I'm going to open it to some questions. I know there's a Q&A part up at the top. If you have any specific questions that I didn't address or talk about, or you'd like me to, give you my opinion on it, feel free to type them in. I'll give you a couple minutes. Okay. I have a question asked, do you use a spinning reel? Yes, I do. I use them whenever I'm normally when I'm using like shaky head or blade baits, or even when I'm dock fishing, I will use a spinning reel. That's one of my preferences, just because I can do more with it like if you're trying to skip a bait up under a dock, I can do it's easier for me, and I don't create a mess in the bait caster. And I also feel that whenever you're doing really kind of like finesse fishing, it also gives you the ability that whenever you hook them, one, you can use lighter line and still be able to use the drag with your hand a lot easier, to where you won't lose the fish. And that's just my preference, a lot of it. But I like, whenever I'm finesse fishing, I like using spinning reels over bait casters. Now, if I'm flipping or crankbaits or buzz baits and stuff like that, I'll use a bait caster with heavier line. Next question was, are you using leaders? I use 10-pound line, no leader, thanks. I don't use leaders. A lot of times I'll just use, like if I'm using real light line, I'll just do the whole spool straight light line. 8-pound like 6 or 8 pound test, I'll just run it straight on the spool. About the only time that I would even think about using a leader is sometimes whenever I drop shot, I use a leader. I actually use a swivel and tie the swivel to the main line, and then the tag line coming down. I guess you really don't call it a leader, but the tag line coming down, I'll use a little bit thinner of a diameter, just so that it doesn't mess with the presentation of the drop shot bait much. I'll give it a couple more minutes, see if anyone else got any questions, and I'm going to wrap it up. But if any questions do arise after I wrap it up, there will be an email sent with a link to a recording of the webinar. And also, I believe it has my email address. You're welcome to email me any questions that might arise that I can answer for you. I have no problem doing that. Well, don't look like we have any more questions, so I'm going to wrap up the webinar. I appreciate everyone attending. I hope it was informative for you, and I hope it'll help you create. I hope it'll help you catch more fish on your fishing adventures. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.